Just let's start. My colleague was just talking about Boris Johnson perhaps falling into line, saying he was behind every word of Theresa May's speech. Does that how it looks to you, the Conservative Party cabinet, all very much a nest of singing birds?
Well, I hope that's what we're going to see from Boris this afternoon. That's what is needed very much now, is a unified cabinet position on these very important Brexit negotiations. I think the mood here very much has been amongst MPs and party members that they're pretty unimpressed with those ministers who want to set down their own red lines on Brexit, and that seeks to undermine the Prime Minister's Florence speech position, which I think we are all basically behind.
So, I mean, has he done enough to stop himself being sacked, do you think?
Well, I think he's speaking this afternoon, so we will see what he says. The briefing is, as you say, that he's going to be loyal to every last full stop and syllable. But, of course, we'll see exactly what he says. And the proof is in the pudding in what he perhaps doesn't write in articles in the next few weeks.
Does this take away questions about leadership of the Conservative Party? I mean, I know that The Times has been talking about Amber Rudd hiring Linton Crosby, and maybe she wants to launch a bid. Are there other contenders warming up in the wings right now?
I don't think so. I think it's generally agreed that Theresa May is there for at least the period to deliver Brexit to get us to March 2019. I don't think there's any appetite amongst the parliamentary party or party members for an early leadership contest. I think that we regard it as something that's unhelpful when we've got these really critical negotiations for the future of our country.
And if we end up in another election earlier than planned, who would get your backing? Theresa May still?
Well, I mean, I think, we'll have to see what happens. And I've been quite clear that I think it's going to be difficult for Theresa May to lead us into the next general election. But I don't expect that election to come anytime soon. Actually, this is a government and a parliament that is working, that will be able to get things like the EU withdrawal bill through, I think, with amendments. And that's what we're going to discuss when we get back to Westminster from next week. And I think with careful handling, I just think that actually people outside the Westminster bubble, outside the party conference, saying, can you please just get on with these negotiations? Oh, by the way, can you please talk about other things as well that we're also really interested in?
Yes, well, I'm going to dwell on Brexit, I'm afraid. On the transition in particular, about 2 years seems to be the phrase that we're hearing a lot. The BCC, though, says 3 years. I spoke to the British Chambers of Commerce this morning, and they continue to say 3 years is what business would like. Is 3 years still possible?
Well, I think obviously all these things are up for negotiation. I think it was really welcome that the Prime Minister in the Florence speech definitely confirmed that there would be a transition period. She calls it implementation period, and obviously that depends on where we get to in terms of having an agreement to implement in March 2019. And I'm very much in the belief that we must have a deal. I think it will be a disaster to walk away from Europe with no deal. But I think it's important that that principle has been agreed and that business can know that it's not all going to change in March 2019, because that's impossible for them to plan for.
You've put your name to a number of Brexit amendments attached to the latest bill. What are you most confident of getting through?
Well, I think what's generally agreed is that what's happening is we're bringing a lot of law back from Europe into the English legal system, and the question is how that is scrutinised. Is it done on the floor of the House of Commons, or do these things happen without proper scrutiny? That's often what happens with what's called secondary legislation, but I think this is so important what's happening now. It is actually right that MPs are able to sift, if you like, the important bits and say, this is important, we think it should be debated. This one actually is very technical, we don't think this needs to be debated. And I think there is broad sympathy amongst ministers for that position.
And are you working across the aisle on these matters? Are you working with more moderate parts of the Labour Party on this?
Well, look, there are discussions. We absolutely are not putting our name or support to anything that is tabled by the Labour front bench. That wouldn't be appropriate. That's not what we want to be doing. But I think it's important that Conservative backbenchers make clear their position on these very important bills.
Is that talking about working with across the aisle and the room for the moderates? Where is the room for the middle in UK politics these days? We've been covering what's happened at the Labour Party conference, and then some of my colleagues were writing about the long lines to get in to listen to Jacob Rees-Mogg, more from the right of the party. Here at the Conservatives, where is the room for the middle in UK politics these days?
Well, I think there's a real appetite for the middle. I think, when I go out on the doorsteps in my Midlands, Loughborough constituency, that's what people want to see. I mean, there's always at party conferences an appetite from party members and audiences to listen to the characters, and that's exactly what Jacob is. He's a very eloquent speaker, but I think actually we are much better as a party, we're much stronger when we appeal to the centre ground of British politics. And I was writing yesterday an article for the Evening Standard talking about the recent Lord Ashcroft polling, which sets out some of the perceptions people have of the Conservative Party, and I really think that we need to be thinking hard how we address those. I would regard them as misperceptions, but if that's what people think, then we need to do better about explaining what we stand for.
One more just on the Brexit subject, Nicky. One of my colleagues has been writing about how the UK Theresa May has pledged that we will bridge the budget gap with the EU budget. But when will that money be paid? Perhaps that money could be withheld until some kind of trade deal. Is that still something that the UK can use as leverage? The actual payment of the money could be used as leverage to drive forward onto the trade agenda?
Well, obviously, possibly. But I get the impression that the EU want to negotiate the money early. And I think that Theresa May is absolutely right to have indicated that we will make our budget contributions. I think it's right. I mean, Britain is a country that pays what it has agreed to pay. I was actually EU budget minister when that was agreed, the budget up to 2020. And I think it's right that we continue to make our contributions. I think that will help to smooth the negotiations. And I think some kind of trade-offs about when it's paid and everything else would kind of detract maybe from the other bigger issues. If we can sort out the money and sort out the rights of EU citizens here in the UK and British citizens in the EU, those are two really big steps forward, and I hope the EU will respond in kind.